Well, I hope you can read that from the back, because Totnes has a certain reputation, and we actually are twinned with Narnia, and people do run regular exchange visits. But actually the transition movement is an extremely practical, hard-nosed movement that's doing really valuable practical things. It's not flaky, new agey in that sense at all. Davey was right, absolutely correct, when he said it originated here in Ireland, but the rest of the world thinks it started in Totnes, so I guess that makes it just one more thing we've stolen from the Irish. Where you're not right though, Davey, is I noticed that in none of your pictures of Clock Jordan was it raining, and I haven't just been there for 2 days. So, I'm going to race through this fairly quickly, because we want to leave plenty of time for conversation. This is a slide that's actually used by the Climate Change Commission to help the UK government towards its target of achieving an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. Now you might think, and many people think, that to achieve an 80% reduction in climate emissions overall means achieving an 80% reduction in household emissions. But actually household emissions are easier to deal with than many other areas of the economy. It's harder to reduce the emissions for some areas of industry, agriculture, transport. So the prediction from the Climate Change Commission is that household emissions have to be reduced to almost zero well before 2050 if the UK as a whole is going to achieve this target. So people this morning in one of the sessions I were in were talking about what do we mean by deep retrofit? Is that 80% reduction? And actually I'm afraid if a deep retrofit means an 80% reduction, then today's retrofit is tomorrow's retrofit. We're going to need to redo it if we're going to really be serious about these targets. So it's a big, big target to reach. And as other people have already said, that a substantial proportion comes from carbon emissions from households, around 25 to 30% in the UK, probably a similar figure in Ireland, and that's around 5 tonnes per household. So a big target. And there's other reasons as well for reducing energy consumption in households. Some of you may recognise this photograph, which is a revamp of a Dutch master's painting. And the title of the picture is that a woman reading her eviction notice, but she could equally be reading her energy bill. Our homes are not sustainable, our energy and heating are not affordable at the moment. So we can respond to that through new build. These are passive houses built as social housing in the north of England. Ironically, many of the people who now live there are former miners who have a coal allowance as part of their pension, which they're not going to get the chance to use. We can go downscale a bit, not so high tech. This is a home that a couple of people I know built using largely recycled materials. It's very energy efficient, very low energy embedded in the materials used in the house. And even further down the scale, this is Simon Dow's house. It cost him £3,000, virtually zero energy embedded in those materials. And we can also look at community building, community new build. This is a sustainable community in Wales called Llamas. That's their planning application. I'm not sure if it was the first, second, third, fourth or fifth planning application. It took them about 7 or 8 years to finally get approval. But they did, and they're now building. But what's much more important than new build is retrofitting the existing housing stock. And as people said this morning, 90% of the homes that are going to be here in 2050 are already here, and we have to deal with those. If every house we built from today onwards was a zero carbon house, we would still have a huge problem. So how do we approach this issue? And one of the ways we've adopted in Totnes is David referred to it as scaling up. I would look at it as scaling up and scaling down, and looking at working with people and individuals and small groups of people as well. And we had a project in Totnes called Transition Streets. Now this project involved bringing together groups of neighbours and working for a 7-week programme, looking at ways in which they could save carbon emissions and money in different parts of their lives. Here's a group meeting. It was meant to be a social occasion. The first meeting that people would have, they would work out how often they were going to meet, where they were going to meet, how long they would meet for. The 5 meetings following that, they would work through spending less on energy, less on water, reducing spending on food but eating well, Wasting Away dealt with their waste. Getting Around deals with the carbon and costs involved in transport. And then the 7th session would be a wrapping up event, a finishing event. Except in many cases they didn't finish. They carried on looking at other issues, giving birth to their own initiatives. We've had community gardens, we've had film clubs, we've had all sorts of things arise out of these groups. And in Totnes now we've had, and Totnes in the area, in round 1 of Transition Streets programme we had 26 groups involving 140 households. Round 2, 31 groups of 260 households, and the total is now well over 500 households involved. And Totnes is a town of about 8,500 people, about 3,000 or 4,000 households. So this is a significant percentage of the population, and the project enabled us to reach out and involve people who hadn't previously been involved in transition and wouldn't be familiar with it. And the aim of this was to help people develop a resiliency to issues like climate change, peak oil, which are the 2 things that we emphasise a great deal, and costs, household costs, and that was increasingly emphasised as the economic situation changed. The outcomes, and we didn't have funding to measure this accurately, so there's a margin of error in these figures, but we estimate that around about over 1 tonne carbon per year per household, equivalent to a saving of around about £570 a year in heating costs and other costs. That adds up over the project in a year of about 600 tonnes in a year and about £300,000 in a year. The funding we had for this project was £625,000 that we got from the outgoing Labour government. We had to spend it in 3 months. So it was a very tight schedule. So the programme involved working with these groups, establishing these groups, and once they'd completed the programme, they became eligible for a grant towards solar PV, and that was around 2,500 up to 3,500 for low-income households, and we prioritised low-income households. And we installed around 150 PV systems in the area. So that saving will be ongoing, and we spent that money on PV because it was the only way we could really spend it that quickly. So it's been a tremendously successful project. The second project I want to talk about, and I'm not sure if these are happening in Ireland or not, is Eco Opens Homes Weekends. This photograph was taken on the first Eco Home tour that we ran in a village called Dartington, just outside Totnes. This is the road where I live. It's one of my neighbours. And this home is part of an energy network run by the Sustainable Energy Academy called Old Home Super Home. These are all homes that have reduced their energy consumption by 60 to 80%, sometimes more, and they're open to the public on certain days. You can find out about what they've done on websites and so on. And I think this is the only street in the country where there are 2 of these homes in the same road. Mine isn't one of them. So we had a tour where we would walk around houses, visiting houses, talking to the owners about what they had achieved, how they'd done it, and so on. The first year we did it, we had 35 people. The second year we had 75, and it became a bit unmanageable. So what we did in the following year was we had a whole weekend where 13 different homes were open for parts of the weekend. You could choose when and where you would go, and that made it much more manageable. Small groups would turn up. The first year we had that we did it that way, we had around 500 visits. Last year we had 19 homes and around about 1,000 visits. And the event pays for itself through an associated energy fair and feeds some money into the project as well. So it's been a very successful project, and these are happening, the first one I know of in the UK happened in Oxford and then in Brighton, but they're now happening in towns all over the country, too numerous to mention. As I say, I don't know if this is happening in Ireland, but it's a very good way of taking the message about energy efficiency, resiliency, sustainability to the community, because people are learning not from experts, not from books, not from government advisors, but from their neighbours. And if you look at a typical Eco Homes programme, you will be able to find a house that is very similar to your own house. Go and visit it, see what people have done. So it's a real social learning, richer environment in which to take the message of sustainability forward. So I want to end with a question, and the question is this really. New build, this is a new build straw bale house in Totnes. It's very sexy. People are really interested in it. When we include that in the open housing programme, like the passive houses that we include, they have hundreds of visitors. Insulating the loft is not so sexy. If we opened a house and said, come and look at this this is sheep's wool loft insulation. It's a low energy, sustainable material with low miles and so on. They wouldn't get many visitors. So we need to look at how we can encourage communities to see what's really important as being the sexy, the desirable things, and the things like new build, which are not so important, as being less desirable. And one of the ways in which we may be able to do it is this. This slide is a word cloud based on interviews and discussions held with Transition Street's participants. And the larger the word, the more often that word cropped up. Now bear in mind that we'd gone to these people to talk about peak oil, climate change, renewable energy, energy efficiency. And you can actually see peak on there somewhere, or I can, but probably at the back you won't be able to. You can see words such as energy efficiency and so on. But the overriding concerns of the people involved in this were around community and neighbours. And I think that there should be some way in which we can use the concerns that people have about building socially cohesive communities, getting to their neighbours, being part of real communities, use that to take that message about the important things in sustainability and resiliency and energy efficiency. I can't come to Dublin without quoting James Joyce. I saw on a pub this quote from James Joyce: "Mistakes are portals of discovery." So I think that we shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes. And the only people who never make mistakes are the people who never do anything. So let's get out there and make lots of mistakes. Thank you very much.